At 45, single mother Evelyn Carter was only 30 days away from foreclosure. No savings, no second chance, nowhere left to take her daughter. Her only inheritance was an abandoned California vineyard everyone believed was worthless. But when a rusted barrel suddenly cracked open inside the forgotten wine cellar, something impossible hit the stone floor, hundreds of hidden gold coins. What happened next didn't just save Evelyn's home. It uncovered a family secret buried for generations. Don't look away, the most shocking discovery is still coming. At 45, Evelyn Carter had 30 days left before the bank took everything. She stood beside her battered car at the entrance to an abandoned vineyard in Northern California, staring at the foreclosure notice trembling in her hand. In the other, she held a small, rusted brass key, the key to the only place she and her teenage daughter, Hannah, had left to go. 18 months earlier, Evelyn had lost her husband without warning. Since then, she had worked exhausting shifts at a neighborhood grocery store, skipped meals, sold nearly everything of value, and stretched every dollar to keep a roof over Hannah's head. But in the summer of 2026, she finally ran out of time. Then a letter arrived. A distant uncle had left her an old vineyard. For one desperate moment, Evelyn believed it might be the miracle she had prayed for. It wasn't. After driving nearly 6 hours, mother and daughter found dead grapevines covering the hills, shattered windows, a collapsing farmhouse, and fields that looked as though nothing had grown there in decades. Hannah stared at the ruins. "Mom, is this really all we have left?" Evelyn couldn't answer. She simply pulled her daughter close, fighting back tears as the evening wind whispered through the dead vines. She didn't know how she would save their home. She didn't know how she would feed Hannah next month. And she certainly didn't know what was hidden beneath this ruined estate. Because somewhere inside the darkness of that forgotten property was a secret that had remained untouched for decades. And when Evelyn discovered it, 30 days would suddenly become more than enough time to change everything. Her first night at the vineyard, Evelyn barely slept. Every groan of the old farmhouse sounded like something breaking. Wind pushed through cracks around the windows, carrying the dry smell of dead vines into the room where Hannah slept beneath 2 borrowed blankets. Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice. 29 days. That was all she had left. By sunrise, fear had turned into desperation. If the vineyard contained anything worth selling, old equipment, furniture, tools, even a few forgotten bottles of wine, she had to find it. "Hannah, stay near the house," Evelyn said, forcing confidence into her voice. "I'm going to check the cellar." The cellar door was behind the farmhouse, almost completely hidden beneath dead ivy. Evelyn pulled until the swollen wood finally opened with a long, tortured creak. A wave of cold, damp air struck her face. She switched on her phone's flashlight and descended. One step, then another. The wooden staircase complained beneath her weight. At the bottom, the beam revealed a room that looked untouched for decades. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Broken crates covered the stone floor. Hundreds of empty bottles rested beneath layers of dust. Then the smell reached her. Rot. Sour wine. Wet wood. Evelyn covered her mouth. "This can't be it," she whispered. She had driven 6 hours hoping to find salvation. Instead, she had inherited another graveyard. She searched anyway. For nearly 2 hours, Evelyn opened crates and examined bottles, wiping away decades of dust only to discover cracked glass, ruined corks, or wine turned dark with age. Then she spotted an old wooden desk in the far corner. One drawer was locked. Evelyn almost ignored it. But something made her try the brass key she had inherited. Click. Her heart stopped. The drawer opened. Inside were several leather-bound journals tied together with faded string. They belonged to her uncle. Evelyn sat on an overturned crate and began reading. Most entries were ordinary harvest numbers: rainfall, equipment repairs, debts. Then the handwriting changed. The later pages were hurried, almost nervous. One sentence made Evelyn read it twice. The bank must never learn what was preserved below. Evelyn frowned. Below what? She turned the page. Another entry. When everything appears worthless, that is when it is safest. Her pulse quickened. She searched for an explanation, but several pages had been torn out. Mom? Hannah's voice echoed from the stairs. Evelyn quickly closed the journal. I'm okay. Hannah came down carrying 2 granola bars. You've been here forever. Evelyn looked at the food and felt something inside her break. 1 granola bar each. That was breakfast. And unless she found money soon, meals like this might become normal. She hugged Hannah tightly. I just need a little more time. After Hannah returned upstairs, Evelyn kept searching. Not for treasure? She wasn't foolish enough to believe that. She was searching for 1 bottle. 1 surviving bottle from the Vineyard's better years might sell for enough to buy groceries or gasoline. At the deepest end of the cellar stood a row of enormous oak barrels. Most were split open or collapsed. Evelyn checked them one by one. Empty. Ruined. Worthless. Then she reached the final barrel. She placed both hands against it and pushed. Nothing. Evelyn frowned. Every other barrel had moved easily. This one felt impossibly heavy. She wiped away the dust and noticed something else. Its wood was darker. The iron hoops were thicker. And unlike the other barrels, there was no Vineyard marking burned into its side. Evelyn remembered the journal. When everything appears worthless. She crouched beside the barrel. Near its base, almost invisible beneath years of grime, someone had carved 3 small letters into the wood. Say. Her breath caught. They were the same initials engraved on the brass key. For the first time since arriving at the Vineyard, Evelyn forgot about the foreclosure notice. She forgot about the empty refrigerator. She forgot about the 29 days. Because suddenly, she understood something. Her uncle hadn't left her only a ruined vineyard. He had left her a message. And whatever he had worked so hard to hide was inside that barrel. Evelyn remained frozen in front of the barrel. The 3 letters carved into the dark wood seemed insignificant, yet they matched the initials engraved on the brass key now resting in her palm. That couldn't be a coincidence. She ran her fingers over the carving. What were you trying to tell me? She whispered. Her first instinct was to search for a lock, but there wasn't one. The barrel had no visible opening except an old wooden stopper near the top. She pulled at it with both hands. It wouldn't move. Evelyn grabbed a rusted iron tool from a nearby workbench and tried to pry it loose. Nothing. Her palms began to ache. Sweat formed along her forehead despite the cold cellar air. For several minutes. She fought with the barrel until frustration finally overwhelmed her. Come on! Her voice echoed through the cellar. She struck the iron hoop. A sharp metallic crack answered. Evelyn stopped. One of the rusted bands surrounding the barrel had split. Before she could move away, the weakened hoop snapped completely. Crack! The sound exploded through the cellar. Mom! Hannah's frightened voice came from upstairs. Stay there, Evelyn shouted. The barrel shifted. Evelyn stumbled backward as one side of the ancient wood began separating. She braced herself. If there was still wine inside, decades-old liquid was about to flood the floor. The wood split open, but no wine came out. Instead, clink, something small struck the stone. Evelyn stared at the floor. A round metal object rolled through the dust, circled twice, then stopped beside her boot. Another followed. Clink, clink. Then another. Suddenly, dozens of heavy objects poured through the opening, striking the stone floor with a sound unlike anything Evelyn had expected to hear. She dropped to her knees. Coins. Old coins. Her hands trembled as she picked one up. It was heavier than an ordinary coin and covered with decades of grime. Evelyn rubbed its surface against her sleeve. A warm yellow shine appeared beneath the dirt. Her breathing stopped. No. She rubbed harder. Gold. The barrel was filled with gold coins. Mom? Hannah had ignored her warning and was standing halfway down the stairs. Evelyn couldn't speak. Hannah approached slowly, her eyes widening when she saw the glittering pile spreading across the cellar floor. What is that? I don't know. Is it gold? Evelyn looked at her daughter. I think so. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Evelyn's survival instincts returned. Close the cellar door. What? Close it, Hannah, now! Something in her mother's voice made Hannah obey immediately. Evelyn began gathering the coins with shaking hands. There were far too many to count quickly. Dozens became hundreds. And when she looked through the broken section of the barrel, her heart pounded even harder. The visible coins were only the beginning. Inside were several cloth bags stacked beneath a false wooden lining. Evelyn pulled one free. It nearly slipped from her hands because of its weight. She loosened the cord. More coins. Some carried unfamiliar symbols. Others showed dates from generations earlier. Several looked completely different from modern American currency. Hannah whispered, How much is all this worth? Evelyn shook her head. I have no idea. Her mind immediately returned to the journal. The bank must never learn what was preserved below. Now she understood. Her uncle had deliberately hidden this. But why? And where had it come from? Evelyn reached deeper into the barrel. Her fingers touched something that wasn't metal. Paper. She carefully pulled out a small leather envelope wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside was a folded handwritten note. The paper was yellow and fragile. Evelyn opened it carefully. There were only a few lines. She read them once. Then again. Her eyes filled with tears. Hannah noticed. What does it say? Evelyn couldn't answer immediately. The message explained that the coins had been protected through generations of the family. They were never meant to fund luxury or greed. They were meant to be used when the family was in danger of losing the land forever. Evelyn covered her mouth. 29 days. 29 days before the bank took her home. She looked at the broken barrel, then at the gold scattered across the cellar floor. For the first time in 18 months, something unfamiliar entered her heart. Hope. But it came with a terrifying question. Old coins were not automatically a fortune. They could be replicas. They could carry legal complications. They might be worth far less than she desperately wanted to believe. Evelyn picked up one coin and held it beneath the light. Tomorrow, she would find out what it was. And if the truth matched what she was beginning to suspect, the ruined vineyard she had considered her family's final burden might actually hold enough wealth to save everything they were about to lose. But Evelyn still didn't know the most astonishing part. The gold itself wasn't the only thing of value hidden in that cellar. Evelyn did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table beneath a flickering yellow light, staring at 3 gold coins resting on an old dish towel. Just a few feet away lay the foreclosure notice that had terrified her for weeks. Yesterday, that piece of paper had controlled her future. Tonight, it suddenly looked different. But Evelyn refused to celebrate. She had learned the hard way that hope could be dangerous when you had nothing left to lose. At sunrise, she wrapped several coins carefully and drove with Hannah to Sacramento, where an experienced rare coin specialist named Adrian Cole agreed to examine them. The moment Adrian placed the first coin beneath his magnifying lens, his expression changed. Where did you get this? Evelyn hesitated. It belonged to my family. Adrian examined the edge. Weight, markings, and surface before checking several reference databases. Minutes passed. To Evelyn, they felt like hours. Finally, Adrian removed his glasses. "These aren't replicas." Hannah grabbed her mother's hand. Evelyn barely breathed. Adrian explained that the coins appeared to come from several periods, with some connected to an era when gold, agriculture, and regional trade had created extraordinary fortunes throughout California. Certain pieces might be valuable primarily for their gold content. Others could be worth significantly more because of their rarity and history. "How much?" Evelyn asked. Adrian leaned back. "I can't give you a responsible number without cataloging everything." Evelyn's heart sank. Then he added, "But if you found more than a handful of these, you need professional appraisal, legal advice, and secure storage immediately." Evelyn exchanged a look with Hannah. How many would count as more than a handful? Adrian smiled faintly. 20. Hannah almost laughed from nervousness. Evelyn didn't. What if there were hundreds? The smile disappeared from Adrian's face. He stared at her. "Then we are having a very different conversation." Back at the Vineyard that afternoon, Evelyn opened a reputable precious metals tracking app on her phone and watched the market price update across the screen. For years, numbers had frightened her. Mortgage payments, utility bills, credit card balances, grocery totals. Every number seemed to represent something she couldn't afford. Now she multiplied, cautiously. Even using conservative assumptions, the potential value made her hands tremble. The gold alone could represent a life-changing amount. If some coins carried substantial historical premiums, the collection could be worth considerably more. Possibly enough to clear her debts. Possibly enough to stop the foreclosure. Possibly enough to save the Vineyard. Evelyn lowered the phone. She should have felt victorious. Instead, she looked through the kitchen window toward the dead vines. Something inside her shifted. Until that moment, she had viewed the estate as a wreck. The cracked walls were problems. The dead vines were failures. The cellar was a tomb. Even her family's history had felt like another burden handed to her when she was already exhausted. But now Evelyn remembered the journals. She returned to the cellar and read them differently. The entries weren't simply the confused writings of an aging man. They were instructions, warnings, memories. Her uncle had documented years of drought, failed harvests, financial pressure, and stubborn attempts to keep the property alive. Again and again, he had refused to sell the land, even when developers approached him. One passage stopped Evelyn cold. Land does not abandon a family. People abandon the land when they stop believing it can live again. Evelyn closed the journal. For several minutes, she stood silently in the cellar. Then Hannah appeared beside her. "So we can leave now, right?" Evelyn looked at her. "What do you mean? If the coins are worth enough, we can pay the bank and go home." That had been Evelyn's plan. Take the gold. Save their house. Sell this miserable place. Never return. But now she walked outside. The late afternoon sun stretched across the neglected vineyard. For the first time, Evelyn stopped looking at what was dead. She noticed what remained. The stone cellar was still standing. An old irrigation channel still crossed the property. Several vines near the hillside still carried tiny green leaves. Not many, but enough. Evelyn knelt and touched one. Life! After years of neglect, something here was still fighting. She suddenly understood why her family had hidden the gold instead of spending it generations earlier. It wasn't simply wealth. It was a final defense. A promise preserved for the moment when someone would have to decide whether this land was worth saving. Mom Hannah asked softly. Evelyn rose. For 18 months, she had been making decisions based on fear. How to survive another week. Which bill to delay. What possession to sell. What dream to surrender next. But standing among those dying vines, Evelyn asked herself a completely different question. Not, how much can I get from this place? But, what could this place become if I refused to give up on it? She looked toward the farmhouse. Then toward the cellar hiding a fortune beneath its broken floorboards. For the first time, Evelyn no longer saw an inheritance of failure. She saw a second chance. And she was about to make a decision that would transform not only her family's future, but the future of the entire estate. 3 days later, Evelyn sat across from a polished conference table in Sacramento, gripping Hannah's hand beneath it. On the table were photographs of the coins, copies of her uncle's journals, property records, and the foreclosure notice that had followed Evelyn like a shadow. Across from her sat Ryan Mitchell, an attorney specializing in estates and historic property, and Dr. Grace Bennett, a numismatic expert Adrian had recommended. Evelyn had expected another disappointment. Instead, Grace placed a thick folder in front of her. I've completed the preliminary assessment. Evelyn swallowed, and Grace looked directly at her. The collection is significant. The words seemed too small for what followed. The coins were genuine. Many had substantial value based on their gold content, while several appeared to be scarce historical pieces that could command far more from collectors. Grace cautioned that a complete inventory, authentication process, and legal review would still be necessary before anything could be sold. But the preliminary estimate was enough. More than enough. Evelyn stared at the number on the page. Her eyes filled with tears. Is this really possible? Ryan nodded. Assuming ownership is established as expected, you have options now. Options. Evelyn had almost forgotten what that word meant. For 18 months, every decision had been forced upon her. Pay the electric bill or buy groceries. Repair the car or make the mortgage payment. Work another shift or spend an evening with Hannah. Now, for the first time since losing her husband, Evelyn wasn't choosing between two forms of pain. She was choosing between futures. Her first priority was immediate. Stop the foreclosure. Through Ryan. She contacted the lender and began arranging payment of the overdue balance once a carefully selected portion of the collection could be legally sold. The threat hanging over her family was finally beginning to loosen its grip. That evening, Evelyn and Hannah returned to the vineyard. They stood on the porch as sunset painted the hills amber. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Hannah asked. Evelyn looked at her daughter. For months, she had avoided making promises. This time, she nodded. Yes. Hannah smiled and wrapped her arms around her. Evelyn held her tightly. Then Hannah asked the question Evelyn had been thinking about all day. So what happens to this place? Evelyn looked across the neglected vines. She had an answer now. We bring it back. The next morning, she began making calls. Not to luxury car dealerships. Not to real estate agents. To farmers. Soil specialists. Water management experts. Agricultural engineers. Evelyn learned that restoring the vineyard would not be easy. Years of neglect had damaged sections of the soil. The irrigation system was outdated. Many vines would have to be removed entirely. But the land wasn't dead. That changed everything. A sustainable agriculture consultant named Connor Hayes walked the property with Evelyn, collecting soil samples and studying the slopes. Near the western field, he crouched and pushed his fingers into the earth. You've got problems, he said. Evelyn's heart sank. Then Connor stood. But you've also got something worth saving. He explained how modern farming technology available in 2026 could reduce waste and help damaged vineyards recover more efficiently. Soil moisture sensors could determine exactly where water was needed. Weather stations could track heat and humidity across the property. Drone imaging could identify stressed vines before the damage became visible from the ground. Instead of rebuilding the vineyard exactly as it had been, Evelyn could build something more resilient. For the first time, she could see it. healthy rows of grapes stretching across the hillside. The farmhouse restored, the cellar cleaned but preserved. Hannah growing up somewhere connected to her family's history, instead of running from it. But Evelyn wanted more than a profitable vineyard. She wanted the estate to mean something. She decided that only the portion of the gold necessary to secure their immediate future and begin a restoration would be considered for sale after proper appraisal and legal review. Historically important coins would be documented and preserved whenever possible. This treasure survived because someone protected it, Evelyn told Hannah. We shouldn't destroy its story just because we need its value. Hannah smiled. You sound like Grandpa's journals. Evelyn laughed softly. Maybe she did. Weeks earlier, she had arrived carrying one suitcase, a foreclosure notice, and the crushing belief that her life was ending. Now she walked through the vineyard carrying restoration plans. Yet the greatest opportunity wasn't the money. It was what the money gave her back. Choice. The choice to stop surviving and start building. The choice to preserve instead of abandon. The choice to give Hannah something Evelyn thought she had lost forever. A future rooted in hope. Standing at the highest point of the estate, Evelyn watched the sun rise over the damaged vineyard. She could almost see what it might become. But restoring land was one thing. Restoring herself would be much harder. And before Evelyn could truly rebuild the estate, she would have to confront the fear that had controlled her life since the day her husband died. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in the vineyard before sunrise, her boots covered in mud and her hands rough from work. The woman who had arrived carrying a foreclosure notice was almost unrecognizable. Not because she suddenly wore expensive clothes, not because the gold had made her wealthy, but because, for the first time in years, Evelyn no longer looked afraid of tomorrow. The transformation had not happened easily. Restoring the vineyard demanded more from her than she had expected. Dead vines had to be removed. Irrigation lines needed replacing. Sections of exhausted soil required careful rehabilitation. Some mornings began before 5 a.m. Some nights ended after midnight. And money, despite the discovery in the cellar, was never treated as unlimited. Evelyn refused to waste the opportunity her family had protected for generations. With Connor Hayes guiding the agricultural restoration, she installed soil moisture sensors throughout the vineyard. A compact weather station monitored temperature, humidity, wind, and rainfall. Drone surveys helped identify areas suffering from heat and water stress. Slowly, technology began working alongside tradition. But progress was never a straight line. One brutally hot afternoon, a newly repaired irrigation line failed. By the time Evelyn reached the western field, water was pouring uselessly down the hillside. She stared at the damaged pipe. For a moment, the old panic returned. That familiar voice whispered inside her. You can't do this. You're going to lose everything again. 6 months earlier, Evelyn might have believed it. She might have sat down and cried. Instead, she shut off the water. Then she called Connor. Then she picked up a wrench. Hannah found her an hour later, kneeling in the mud. Mom, Connor said his crew is coming. I know. Then why are you doing that? Evelyn tightened the fitting. Because waiting for someone to save us isn't our only option anymore. Hannah stared at her mother. Then she smiled, grabbed another wrench, and knelt beside her. Together, they worked until the sun disappeared behind the hills. That evening, exhausted and covered in dirt, they ate sandwiches on the farmhouse porch. They laughed. It surprised Evelyn how good that sound felt. For so long, their home had been filled with whispered conversations about bills, unanswered phone calls, and the fear of what might happen next. Now they talked about school, the vineyard, the future. Real things. Living things. But Evelyn's greatest change came several weeks later. She was cleaning the cellar when she found another passage in her uncle's journal. It read, "What we leave our children should not merely be something valuable. It should teach them what deserves to be valued." Evelyn sat quietly with those words. She looked toward the restored section of the cellar where the broken barrel remained. She had deliberately kept it. Visitors might someday see an old, damaged container. Evelyn saw the moment her life changed. But she finally understood something deeper. The gold had saved her financially. It had not saved her emotionally. She had done that herself. The treasure gave her time. It gave her choices. But it was Evelyn who had chosen to stay. Evelyn who had learned about soil she once knew nothing about. Evelyn who negotiated with contractors instead of shrinking from intimidating conversations. Evelyn who made mistakes, admitted them, and tried again. Evelyn who stopped measuring her life by everything she had lost. One morning, she and Hannah walked toward the eastern hillside. Months earlier, it had been covered with twisted, dying vines. Now hundreds of newly planted vines stood in straight rows. They were small. Fragile. Nothing about them looked impressive yet. Hannah touched one of the young leaves. "Do you really think these will survive?" Evelyn smiled. "They don't have to become strong overnight." She paused. "Neither did we." Hannah slipped her hand into her mother's. Evelyn looked across the hillside and remembered the frightened woman who had first stood there with 30 days left before foreclosure. She had believed losing her house meant losing her life. Now she understood that a home was more than walls. A legacy was more than money. And strength wasn't about never being terrified. It was about refusing to let fear make every decision. As autumn approached, green slowly returned to the estate. Neighbors who had once assumed the vineyard would be sold began stopping by to watch the transformation. Former workers offered stories about harvests from decades earlier. Local growers shared advice. The abandoned estate was becoming part of the community again. And so was Evelyn. One evening, standing beneath a sky glowing orange and gold, Hannah leaned against her mother's shoulder. "Dad would have loved this place." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. For once, she didn't fight them. "Yes," she whispered, "he would have." She looked toward the young vines moving gently in the evening wind. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Evelyn had come to the vineyard believing she needed a miracle to rescue her. Instead, she discovered something far more powerful, a reason to rebuild herself. And when the vineyard's first new harvest finally arrived, Evelyn would make one decision that ensured the treasure hidden by her family would become something far greater than gold. 2 years after Evelyn first arrived at the abandoned vineyard with a foreclosure notice in her hand, she stood on the same hillside and watched the sun rise. But almost nothing looked the same. Rows of healthy grapevines stretched across the rolling land, their leaves glowing green beneath the California morning light. The broken irrigation channels had been replaced. Sensors quietly monitored moisture beneath the soil. A small weather station stood near the highest ridge, helping Evelyn prepare for heat, wind, and changing conditions before they became disasters. Even the old farmhouse had changed. Its weather-beaten walls had been repaired, the shattered windows replaced, and the porch where Evelyn once sat, wondering how she would feed Hannah, now overlooked a vineyard alive with workers preparing for harvest. But Evelyn had insisted that one place remain almost untouched: the cellar. It was cleaner and safer now, but in the far corner stood the broken barrel that had changed everything. Beside it was a simple wooden plaque. "What looks ruined may still hold something worth saving." Evelyn ran her fingers across those words. She remembered the sound of the first gold coin striking the stone floor. She remembered Hannah asking if the crumbling estate was really all they had left. And she remembered being too frightened to answer. "Mom?" Hannah's voice pulled her back. Evelyn stepped outside. Hannah, now older and more confident, came running between the rows of vines. "They're ready." Evelyn smiled. Across the vineyard, Neighbors, workers, growers, and friends had gathered for something that once seemed impossible. The estate's first restored harvest. Connor approached carrying a small cluster of grapes. "Want to do the honors?" Evelyn took them carefully. For a moment, she simply stared. They were ordinary grapes. Yet to her, they felt more precious than the gold hidden beneath the cellar. The coins had been created long before she was born. These grapes existed because she had chosen not to walk away. Evelyn looked around at the people waiting. "When I first came here," she began, "I didn't come to save a vineyard." Her voice trembled. "I came because I had nowhere else to go." The crowd fell silent. "I thought this land was dead. I thought my family had left me a burden at the worst possible moment of my life." She glanced at Hannah. "And I thought being strong meant hiding how terrified I was." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. Evelyn continued, "Then I discovered something beneath all that decay. Yes, there was gold, and that gold gave us the financial chance we desperately needed." She paused. "But money wasn't what brought this place back." Evelyn looked across the vineyard. "People did." Connor lowered his head with a smile. "Knowledge did. Patience did. Second chances did. And most importantly, believing something was worth saving before there was proof it could be saved." Evelyn raised the first cluster of grapes. "Today we harvest again." Applause erupted across the hillside. Hannah threw her arms around her mother. Evelyn laughed through her tears. Hours later, baskets of grapes filled the estate. Music drifted from the farmhouse. People who had once watched the property decay now walked among living vines. But Evelyn had one final announcement. She gathered everyone near the cellar entrance. Over the previous 2 years, she had sold only what was necessary from the coin collection after proper authentication and legal review. The remaining historically important pieces had been preserved, and Evelyn had decided they would not disappear into another private hiding place. A small portion of the restored estate would become a family heritage room, preserving copies of the journals, photographs, farming tools, and the story behind the hidden cash. More importantly, part of the vineyard's future profits would support local families facing sudden financial hardship. Hannah looked surprised. "You never told me that." Evelyn took her hand. "Because the gold saved one family once." She looked toward the workers and neighbors around them. "There's no reason the second chance has to end with us." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Evelyn and Hannah returned to the hillside. The sun sank behind the mountains, turning the sky deep orange. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that barrel hadn't broken?" Hannah asked. Evelyn smiled. "Sometimes. Do you think we'd still be okay?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "I don't know." Then she looked at her daughter. "But I know something now that I didn't know then." "What?" Evelyn squeezed her hand. "Losing everything you planned doesn't mean you've lost every future available to you." Hannah rested her head against her mother's shoulder. Below them, the vineyard moved gently in the evening wind. 2 years earlier, Evelyn had seen those hills as evidence that her life was over. Now they represented something entirely different. Not wealth, not luck, renewal. The greatest treasure buried on that property had never truly been the gold. The gold had simply opened a door. What Evelyn found on the other side was courage, purpose, family, and the realization that even after life has stripped away everything familiar, something beautiful can still grow from the ground you were ready to abandon. And sometimes, the place that looks like the end of your story is exactly where the next chapter has been waiting for you. Evelyn's story reminds us that what looks like the end may simply be a beginning we haven't recognized yet. When she first arrived at the vineyard, she saw only dead vines, broken windows, unpaid debts, and another painful reminder of everything she had lost. She believed the treasure that changed her life was the gold hidden inside an old barrel. But eventually, Evelyn understood the deeper truth. The gold could pay her debts. But it couldn't give her courage. It could restore buildings. But it couldn't rebuild her heart. She had to choose to do that herself. Life can place us in seasons when every door seems closed. We may lose money, security, people we love, or the future we once imagined. But before you decide that something is worthless, or that it's too late to begin again, look one more time. Your next opportunity may be hidden beneath the very thing you were ready to abandon. And if Evelyn's journey touched your heart, don't let this story end here. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Then tell us in the comments, if you were Evelyn, would you sell the gold and walk away or stay and rebuild the vineyard? Your answer might inspire someone who is facing their own breaking point right now.